Cambridge, Maryland, a city divided by race, literally. The city was, ironically, divided into white and black neighborhoods by Race Street. Economic decline leading into the 1960s opened Cambridge to a world of racial turmoil that flared in 1963 and 1967. Black protest in Cambridge was driven throughout the 60s by a desire for desegregation, better housing conditions in the all-black Second Ward, better recreational facilities, and an end to discriminatory job practices.
Cambridge's first civil rights demonstrations began in 1962. Shortly after, the Cambridge Nonviolent Action Committee, or CNAC, was formed and led by Gloria Richardson. Relatively nonviolent attempts at desegregation occurred with the help of SNCC, increasing in intensity in March 1963 when the Dorset Theater, which had previously allowed seating of blacks in the entire balcony, cut that to only half of the balcony, a step back for the movement. Tensions continued to build into the summer of 1963.
Finally, on the evening of June 14, 1963, fires broke out at some white-owned businesses in the Second Ward. Shots were fired by both blacks and whites, and at least one white store owner was hit by a shot. Any local police entering the area had bricks and bottles rained down on them, leading to the involvement of state police with dogs and riot sticks. After the first night of rioting, Maryland Governor John Todd declared martial law in Cambridge and sent in 500 National Guardsmen who set themselves up on Race Street, causing the black population of Cambridge to raise its guard even higher. The National Guard did not leave town for almost a month, finally departing on July 8th. As the National Guard withdrew, CNAC started up a new wave of demonstrations, particularly sit-ins at Disneyland, a local white-owned restaurant. At one sit-in, owner Robert Fesenfeld knocked down white protester Eric Dickerson, cracking an egg on his head and dumping water on him. Another group of demonstrators at Disneyland was attacked by a white mob on July 12th. That evening, 250 demonstrators held a freedom walk to the courthouse, which spurred on a night of violence that included exchanges of shotgun fire, objects thrown through windows, and fires of white-owned businesses. Over 12 people were shot that night, but none were killed. Demonstrations lulled in Cambridge until unrest among blacks, especially those in poverty, boiled over in 1964 when Alabama Governor George Wallace was invited to speak in Cambridge on May 11th as part of his presidential campaign. Following the speech, 400 civil rights activists faced the National Guard in the streets. When the dust settled, at least 65 people had been hospitalized, including SNCC Field Secretary Clifford Vaz, who had been wounded by a bayonet. After this flare-up, violence in Cambridge lulled once again, this time for a period of 3 years.
In early 1967, both the Justice Department and Associated Press found that racial violence was unlikely to be stirred once again in Cambridge. The events of that summer, however, proved both sources wrong.
During the summer of 1967, there were more issues with desegregation, particularly centering around a pool for the people of Cambridge to use. Despite the pool being open to both blacks and whites, many whites chose to use their old segregated pools, and there was a clear discomfort in the black community. Shortly after the plans for the pool were being put into place, another outbreak of fires occurred targeting white-owned businesses in the Second Ward and a black elementary school.
As tension in the community of Cambridge escalated again, blacks continued to feel unsafe, often carrying guns and knives every day to protect themselves. They didn't know who they might run into and what their intentions might be. The Black Action Federation, or BAF, was already present in Cambridge at this time, and when Joe Carroll, leader of the National States Right Party, gave a very white supremacist speech in Cambridge, BAF pushed back. They asked questions and bothered him. State police soon interfered, fearing another riot. Soon after the events with Joe Carroll and BAF, Gloria Richardson organized for Hubert Rapp Brown, chairman of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, or SNCC, to come speak in Cambridge. On the night of July 24th, Rap Brown arrived and gave a speech to somewhere between 200 to 400 people. His speech was very militant, promoting violence between blacks and whites. He pushed for black power against white honkies. Before Rap Brown even arrived in Cambridge, 28 state troopers and 3 canine units were already there. Following his speech, while escorting a young woman to her home with about 25 to 30 others, Rap Brown was hit with a bullet that ricocheted from the ground from the gun of a police officer. After Rap Brown was escorted to the hospital, fires broke out throughout Cambridge and continued throughout the night. Both blacks and whites fought and exchanged fire. Rioting and protests continued into the next few days, prompting the return of 700 National Guardsmen. By August, the Guardsmen had left Cambridge and the city finally started to quiet down. By 1968, violence was quiet and even the high schools were integrating more peacefully. It very well seemed that after $300,000 in fire damage to the town in July 1967, residents of Cambridge were ready to accept change.
As the movement in Cambridge came to a close, there were some victories to be seen. There were interracial religious services, a new community center, the construction of new housing units, and peaceful integration of high schools, with increasing numbers of blacks in both the student body and faculty. Black employment also rose after the 60s. The events that took place in Cambridge, Maryland, during the 1960s are an important part of the civil rights movement. Though often overlooked, what happened in Cambridge showed what strong local leaders like Gloria Richardson could do and how economic shifts played a role in the start of the movement. Cambridge provides an interesting picture of the movement in the middle ground, not exactly north, not exactly south, and not exactly definable by either of the two extremes.
This little love of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine.